pursuant to Article 7, and that's referring to notice of the first anti-doping policy violation.
Okay, thank you.
I may have one other question for you, and I also, Dr. Eichner, I know you're still here, I would pose this to you as well. In any of the cases, if you can speak to them, have we ever found a source? Do we know of, and I guess the question would be, obviously, the source would be, yeah, you know, I took some oral Turinabol. That's great. Do we know where they're getting it? Do we know where it's coming from? Do we know, or if you've found it in an actual supplement, a contaminated supplement? Do we have any knowledge of the source of this that you could speak to?
In intentional doping cases, we have identified the source. For cases involving very low
I don't have questions. Let the record reflect that he shook his head as well.
I just have one more question, and Dr. Eichner discussed this a little. You brought up the levels as part of the future review, and you referenced at a nanogram level, right, that it may make you hesitate or possibly evaluate new ingestion. Is that what you would view as a minimum threshold level that would indicate new or re-ingestion?
Just to confirm, are you asking me or Dr. Eichner?
I'm asking you, sorry.
Okay. I would defer to Dr. Eichner and Dr. Fedoruk for the most part, if not entirely, on that question. But certainly, I mean, I can tell you this, in the intentional doping cases, we have seen it over a nanogram.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you have any questions for Mr. Cook? Okay. Thank you.
It would be fun to ask him questions.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
I guess at this point, Mr. Green, do you have any additional people you'd like to call forward?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I know that the UFC is here. Does the UFC, Mr. Nowitzki, Mr. Ratner, Mr. Campbell, do you have anything that you would like to add to the record of the testimony today? Does anybody on the commission have any questions of them? Okay. Mr. Jones, could you please come back forward, sir? There's way too many people yawning in the audience, so I figured that we've gotten to the point of boring. I caught you napping back there, so I'm glad you relaxed. Do you have, I guess right now, would the commission have any final questions, or first, would you have a final statement you'd like to make to the commission before? Because the process at this point is I'm going to close the hearing, and once I close the hearing so commissioners are clear, there are no more questions for anybody in the audience or any of the witnesses. I can reopen, but would prefer not to.
I prefer
to have a question at this
closing
point.
on behalf of Mr. Jones.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to make a closing on behalf of Mr. Jones.
You'll get that opportunity. I'm just making sure before we get to your closing statement that there are no additional questions for the people who testified today or anybody else in the audience that you would like to have come forward. Everybody's speak now or forever hold your peace. And if we get to something real serious, I will open it back up. I don't want to do that. So, Mr. Green, I will turn it over to you for your closing statement, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise to be brief. I know that on December 23rd, the Commission agreed to allow Mr. Jones to appear today to allow for measured, thoughtful, and comprehensive discussion of his anti-doping testing protocol results and provide an opportunity for the Commission to determine the appropriate path forward for him in Nevada. I think it was a very good discussion that hopefully revealed the science that we had said in our submission and we promised would be here today. I mean, I think a few things came out in terms of themes. One, there's absolutely no evidence of re-administration after July 28th, 2017. And two, while he wasn't tested for the 10-month gap between October 2017 and August of 2018, I think there's two important things to bear in mind there. The first one, as Dr. Fedoruk importantly said, his steroid profile and his blood passport were both normal and did not indicate any usage in that period. So I think that's an important biomarker to understand. That's the first thing. The second thing is he was subject to testing during that entire period, and as Mr. Cook said, was preparing for his hearing. It would have been fairly bold behavior to intentionally take, or even, at that point, somehow ingest DHCMT while he was getting ready for a hearing, facing a lifetime ban potentially. And there's no evidence at all that it actually took place, although there is that gap. It wasn't his fault that he wasn't tested, and certainly it's not fair to hold that against him. Certainly since August of 2018, he's been probably the most tested athlete on the planet. If you look at all of his test results, and he's been doing the VADA testing since December 28th, and he'll continue to do that testing. And as a way forward here, if the commission, as Mr. Jones said himself in his opening, would want him to continue that VADA testing beyond the agreed upon period with California, we would certainly agree to that. I think it's helpful to continue to have as much data as possible, and certainly Jones is cool, so that there are no issues with any more gaps like there were in that 10-month gap when he was subject to testing but not actually tested. So as a condition of reinstatement, he would be happy to continue to do the testing. I know Dr. Goodman is here today from VADA, and that's who he has been doing the testing in addition to USADA under the California State Athletic Commission agreement for reinstatement. I'm not going to try to recreate Dr. Eichner's testimony, but I think it's pretty clear that without any presence of other metabolites beyond the M3 long-term metabolite at the low picogram levels that he has been in his urine in August, September, December, and we think the most recent results, as I'd said, perhaps continue to have the low levels in January. There's no evidence of re-administration, and as far as what makes sense going forward in terms of the appropriate path for him, I believe it would be appropriate to follow the lead here of USADA in the sense of looking at the first M3 metabolite positive for which he was punished very differently than any subsequent positive. And even though the rules I understand don't have a double jeopardy provision, I don't think it's going to weaken the program, for my 2 cents, if you put one in there, because I think it's only fair to not punish somebody again if there's no evidence that there's been any re-administration, which there is none here. So he's happy to, as I said, follow the protocol in California, which is every time there is a presence of M3 long-term metabolite without any presence of a short-term or intermediate metabolite at a low level as part of VADA or USADA testing, the authority here is Dr. Eichner and Smyrtle, and if it's their opinion that there's no re-administration, then it doesn't count as another anti-doping rule violation. And I think that that's a fair way of approaching this. Obviously, John's hopeful that we leave here today with a decision being made. We respect the Commission's authority to not make a decision today, but he's certainly hopeful that there will be one made today. This has been weighing on him for a long time, and he wants to put this behind him and just focus on fighting. And from my perspective, he certainly has that right. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. I don't need to go on. The testimony is what it is for over 2 hours, so I don't need to summarize it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, do you have anything you want to say?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any of the commissioners have any final questions for Mr. Greer or Mr. Jones? Executive Director Bennett?
Mr. Jones, I understand that you gave substantial assistance to USADA, and that's why you got a downward departure from 18 months to 15 months.
That's actually not correct, Mr. Bennett.
Okay.
There was substantial assistance, but we're not prepared to discuss it today here in public. It's not appropriate, and it's confidential under the USADA rules. The reduction by Mr. McLaren was from 18 to 15 based upon his evaluation of Mr. Jones's degree of fault.
Okay.
But I'm not going to permit him to answer any.
But it's certainly not the federal rules, so that's fine. If he
I'm
doesn't want to share with us in an effort to, have the opportunity to have the privilege of being licensed here, and it's confidential, then I understand it.
Yeah, I just ask that you respect the confidentiality of that.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, I'll close the hearing.
Good night. Okay, so we've heard a lot of evidence and a lot of testimony. I appreciate everybody's participation in this. Before we start deliberating this, I just want to reiterate for the record, this is exactly in Nevada how this is going to go. We will not be rushed to judgment. We will not be given information at the last minute and decide things that are this sensitive. This is exactly how it should go. The public should get to see exactly what we have to say, exactly what the experts have to say. So I'm very proud of today's hearing, regardless of the outcome and the decision that we all decide to make. But it's important to me that there's integrity in the public process and that the public understands exactly what this commission is thinking. So in saying that, I would turn it over to the commissioners to start the discussion. Happy to entertain a motion if somebody feels comfortable going there right out of the gate. But usually, because we haven't had a full commission like this on a case that's this substantial and or complicated, probably would be good for each commissioner, maybe talk about how they feel about where they want to go. And then from there, we can try to form a motion, an appropriate motion based on what we think we're thinking. And if we don't agree, then we can still have a motion and a second and vote. So, Mr. Macbeth, in my linear world, and the doctor on the commission, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, it's pretty clear to me that we currently don't understand the science around this long-term M3 metabolite. And, part of the problem here is it's very likely we will never understand it, and that we will not be able to perform excretion studies, as Dr. Eichner said, and it's unethical. That said, I believe it is, very incumbent upon us to ensure that unarmed combatants fighting in the state of Nevada are not using performing enhancing drugs and gaining an advantage that could be dangerous, even fatal to another fighter. And so, at this point in time for me, Mr. Jones, this is a second anti-doping policy violation that you have. And for me, I need significant amount of certainty that there's not re-administration going on, intentional or unintentional, to ensure the integrity of our testing process. So I'll hold future comments.
Okay, Commissioner Hahn?
I agree with the doctor, and I think, we've heard a lot of good testimony today. Clearly, we're in uncharted waters on multiple fronts here, which causes us to be challenged on many levels. I think what resonated with me was the double jeopardy. I think that, in the court of law, double jeopardy, it isn't allowed, and I think he's been punished once. But then, and the multiple tests since then, but how do we assure going forward? So I have some of the same issues that Dr. Macbeth has on what type, and I know Mr. Jones has agreed to, and he has been, multiple testing. Anyone can test them anytime and do whatever they want, which I think is probably a path that we need to pursue. But the double jeopardy really resonated with me, but I'm very concerned, and we don't want anyone to get hurt. I think, to sidebar here, one of the things Director Bennett does so well is in matchmaking. We don't want anyone to get hurt here, and we want fights fairly, fighters fairly matched. And if there's any drugs involved, then anything that he's done in his vetting kind of goes out the window. And, God forbid anyone gets hurt here, because I know that Bennett takes it seriously, as do all the commissioners, but some of the same issues. How do we enforce and how do we make sure that Mr. Jones is properly tested going forward?
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Alonso.
Thank you, Chairman. While we've heard many times today and previously there's no evidence of re-ingestion. I mean, what I believe is there's no evidence that he didn't. There's expert opinion, but there's no evidence due to the nature of the illegal substance and the lack of research that's been done because it's banned. Which I think puts our commission in a situation where we recognize this is a technical issue, and we have to rely on our experts in effort to decide what to do. I'm concerned that there's not 100% certainty at any time in our future, even if we have increased testing and the testing continues to be adverse. You know, obviously the last 4 out of 5 tests in the last 60 days, including the 2 BATA tests in January, there are adverse findings. That I don't believe there's anything that can give us the 100% certainty that there's not something that's being done, because it just continues to appear. With that, I do really value the time and expertise of Dr. Eigner and the information you provided us today. I think that I'm really just still processing, as we sit here right now, I'm processing it all on how to, in effort to find a way to move forward, whatever. Like, I'm not prepared to be the leader in the motion at this moment.
Okay. Commissioner Hall?
I think all the commissioners have certainly well stated what they feel and where we are, John.
Was that the term is going up? So he's, it's approximately at this point, what, 5 months? And the testimony that I also heard was that post the last ingestion of the 6-week cycle, you're looking at about 6 and/or days in between tests from opening. So I'm going to stop there with saying I would be comfortable departing slightly from what's going on. The rest of it to me. So you have to look at it for the 7 months that we would have it, and if it stays at the picogram level, you know, call it, you know, under 100, you know, as it's bouncing around. My biggest concern is that there is no performance enhancing effect. And I don't look at this as a license that's for a year. I look at this as it's a 1-fight license for right now. It's a 1-fight license. Post that fight, this level of testing will continue. And it needs to continue for probably at least all of 2019 to monitor it and to study it and to have additional hearings on it and to have additional dialogue and discussions on it. I think that based on what we've heard, that's fair. It's a departure. Now, let me stop there and go to Pandora's box of all other fighters. That was some really good testimony from Mr. Eichner and from Mr. Cook, in the sense that I was having a lot of trouble about breaking out of the norm for this. But I think the approach that was put on this, the approach that was testified to is an interesting way to look at it, and not one that I had contemplated. If another fighter comes in here with their first M3 metabolite test, we're not having a hearing like this. It's going straight to the process that they all go to, because that is the first ingestion that we have knowledge of, and the process would be the same as it has always been. However, for this particular drug and this particular metabolite, after the fighter's original adjudication for the original ingestion, they would have the ability to get on a program like this, and after a lengthy period of time, potentially have a discussion about they are in this same pulsing and residual effect. If you think about that period that a fighter would have to go through, I hope a whole bunch of fighters haven't run out there and started doing this, because you're probably going to be sitting out at least 2 years before you're going to be able to come back in here and get a license if we wanted to acknowledge pulsing. That is much different than the TUEs that were brought to us back in the day 5 to 8 years ago. Those are 2 completely different issues, and I'm not as concerned about Pandora's box as I was walking in here this morning. So that's my comments on what I've heard today, and I think that if we did go down this path for the one fight license, you know, other jurisdictions are going to do what other jurisdictions are going to do. What I don't think we should do today, if the commission chooses that they do not want to do that, I would absolutely not be in support of denying him his license. I don't see anything here that says we should deny this man the right to earn a living. What he's going through, California and other jurisdictions may feel more comfortable than we do in monitoring this. And I don't see anything here that supports an outright rejection of the license, and because the reciprocity will kick in and other commissions usually respect one another. So I'm comfortable at this point that we have gone through the longest hearing that I've had in 4 years here and understood this information, but that doesn't, I'm one of 5. I would throw that out to you guys to consider, you know, the one fight license. We have to continue to be submitted and monitor this because it will be get a licensing. If we did this for 2019, then we can sit down and decide if further testing is required at this level. Because remember, if we do this too, you're going to put the athlete under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. He's going to live with a lab coat for quite a while, of which he's volunteered, and I commend him for that because that's not fun. So. Then I think that's a huge step forward in him wanting to move forward. So I would turn it over to you guys, and I'm totally open to rejection. As a matter of fact, I'm quite used to it. It frequently happens. So it won't hurt my feelings, but I think it's important that if you have things that you don't agree with that, or if I didn't have things that you all agree with, I would be saying it's important that happens up here.
I would just say going forward, it's just critical that we're able to determine with that level of certainty that there is no re-ingestion or re-administration of the Turinabol. And based off of Dr. Eichner's testimony around the short-term metabolites in the 2-week range, I agree with the chairman's suggestion that a minimum would be twice a month, and ongoing into the future, all of 19 would be a very reasonable time frame for me.
I also support that what we are considering today is a one fight additional license. I don't think that I came in here today thinking that this could turn into a disciplinary topic or potentially a ban or refusal. Chairman, as you recommended, I do support and agree that our conversation will now move into a one fight additional license motion consideration.
I would be supportive of that, and John, I think one of the areas that I think this would provide help is that if you're tested, obviously more frequently, like the chairman's suggesting, it provides people like Dr. Eisner and them a chance to analyze this and see where it's going. I mean, what it does, to athletes, and to get a better idea of where it is, so we in athletics can monitor. I mean, so you're representing not only just yourself, but another field for people to see where it is, because we're saying that you haven't ingested. We're saying that you are sincere about wanting to be a supreme MMA athlete, which you are. You want to remain a champion, and champions lead, they don't fall. So now we're asking you to lead not only in the ring, but also as a guy who's going to test more than the normal person is going to test. So these people, the experts, can enlighten us more and more as we move forward with the anti-doping anti-doping program.
Two tests, exactly. So I think SADA, it needs to be immediately reported. We need full disclosure on all VADA tests. And the Nevada Athletic Commission Executive Director Bennett will absolutely do its own random and unannounced test. Anywhere in the world at any time. Mr. Bennett?
Very good, sir.
Okay. So that would be the three conditions in separate hearing. That we need this testing for a year to understand it. And then I can't really project a motion or any other conditions post that. I think we have to let, if the testing continues to happen, we'll continue to monitor. You will make your choices of jurisdiction that you go fight to. However, that information needs to come to us. And when Mr. Jones chooses to come back here a second time, because of course he's going to want to fight the fight capital of the world, we will take the information at that time that we've been given, and if required, we will have another hearing. And probably a much shorter hearing on that, but we will probably have Dr. Eichner and Mr. Cook again come back in and give us that information, and we'll reconsider that again. So that would be, to be really clear on the motion, it would be a one-fight license, 2 tests a month for all of 2019, up to the fight and post the fight, all of 2019, by USADA, VADA, and the Nevada Athletic Commission. And all of those tests by those agencies would be given immediately to the Nevada Athletic Commission. And that's really it. I don't need to think about it much past that because it's really only good till March the 2nd. Do you have something to add, sir? Because you look like you're about ready to jump over that microphone.
Well, I just want to make sure, before when you were deliberating, you mentioned having a level of results that would be acceptable that went over a certain level. Do you want to put that in the condition as well?
That's a tough one, and I
think you have to consider it individually. Each test result individually.
So with that,
let me. This is highly unusual, but Dr. Eichner, could you please come back up to the microphone? Mr. Jones, you don't have to move. You keep or that's fine. Dr. Eichner, is it possible that you could give us a range, picogram levels or nanogram levels, that if we see the M3 metabolite show up between now and March the 2nd, that we should have pause for concern that there's been re-administration?
Mr. Chairman, my strong recommendation would be that you look at the totality of the data, make a determination as opposed to giving an absolute threshold for any individual analyte. I premise that, but on the side, if there was evidence of other metabolites or the parent compound, that would be a different discussion, but my strong recommendation would be you look at the data longitudinally and make that decision.
If there are other metabolites or different compound, I would assume that's going to ride with past practice, and it would be, based on what it is, most likely though a temporary suspension. This is not a waiver for any and all metabolite. This is a waiver for the M3 metabolite as it pertains strictly to the oral turinabol and that direct connection. Anything else is not in this motion. What I'm trying to get to is, I guess what I'm hearing you say is if we see a spike in the nanograms between now and this fight, that we're going to have to get on the phone with you, and we're going to have to discuss these results and what they potentially have done many, many a times.
That would definitely be my recommendation, sir.
Okay, I can only do that if the testing results. I would only support that if the testing results that are being done by VADA and by USADA are
USADA testing, and then of course control the report. And also, just one other point, Mr. Jones cannot control whether or not he's tested twice a month or 10 times a month. It's not up to him to come and get tested. So that's the other concern that I simply raise, in that he's happy to agree to whatever conditions you make him agree to, provided that's actually the other people involved make sure that works.
I got it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase then. Between between now and March the 2nd, is 1 month and a couple of days. So we will test him at our frequency at what we determine for the next 40 days. And that would give me even a higher degree, not that I don't have a high degree of confidence in USADA and VADA, but that'll make it really simple to remove those issues.
That's appreciated, Mr. Chairman. That's the best way to move forward.
That would be the way to craft a motion. It would be, it's a one, and okay. I'm just making it clear to you, and you have a lot of influence over the UFC and USADA, that going forward, Mr. Jones is going to have to make it a requirement that those agencies report to Nevada. It's not up to the agency's discretion. And I ask that they please don't test how broad I think my jurisdiction is in the state of Nevada. Just cooperate and give me the information, and I'll have that discussion offline. But he needs to also support that request.
He's fully supportive of that. To the extent that we can influence that, we're happy to.
Fair. Okay, so that simplifies the motion. Yeah. It's a one-fight license. He'll be heavily tested with the frequency we've discussed up until March the 2nd. And by then, Executive Director Bennett, you will have to determine with USADA, if you can, by our February meeting, how we're going to work as cooperating agencies as it pertains to this particular issue. And maybe we can report back in February, which would be prior to the fight. And then I would also include in the motion that these tests, it's probably not going to be more than 6, are going to be paid for by the applicant.
Post-fight.
No, to March the 2nd.
Correct, but post-fight, as far as the motion goes, post-fight, it's still our intent to test all the way through 2019 and at a frequency no less than twice a week.
It would be, and if we can find a resolution with USADA as they're already administering these tests, then I would be, we can talk about it in February as to making this an agenda item of an agreement on how the frequency is going to happen. And Mr. Nowitzki, I'm sure you can help that discussion. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll get through that in February.
Yeah, and I think that just to state the obvious, whether assuming it's Smyrtle or USADA that's executing our testing, is that it's identical to how Executive Director Bennett requested the December 9th results to be expedited, because we don't have a month time frame.
That's
right,
good.
so every test has to be expedited in the same way that we requested.
That's all on us at this point.
Okay.
We will control that and run those tests and control the expedition of those tests. He may be subject to other tests, and hopefully they disclose them at the pace they have. Agreeable?
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes unanimously. Okay. Mr. Jones, I appreciate you being here today. Appreciate you coming here to testify. Welcome back to the state of Nevada. If you recall, a long time ago, you and I had a conversation in your locker room when you came back to Nevada. I will reiterate what Coach said. Coach, Commissioner Alt, we call him Coach. This is on you. It's on your shoulders. I like what I hear, I like what I see, but the proof's in the pudding. So I'm happy that you're back here. You'll always be treated with respect here, and I wanted to make sure that you understood that today. Welcome back to Nevada, and do the right thing from this point going forward. And as you know, we're going to be visiting you frequently. Thank you. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Lastly, oh, let's drag this out for another 20 minutes. Is there any public comment in the room? Any public comment on the phone?
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Is there any public comment on the phone? Okay, and hearing none, the chairman report, I have none at this time. Item I, matters for future agendas. there's two things, Executive Director Bennett, and in order of priority on the February agenda, I would like yourself to come back to us with a recommendation and understanding and the UFC on what the frequency of Jon Jones testing is going to be and the reporting of those results for the calendar year of 2019. And the second thing would be, if you could pick a date in the near future and discuss with the Deputy Attorney General on if we need to look at altering the regulation, which as we know is a lengthy process, or if we need to or can issue a guidance memo as it pertains to the verbal code of conduct from all unarmed combatants. I would like to first understand the legal process in which we can move through that, and then that would guide where I think we want to go with that. But I'm very open to looking deeper into these code of conducts that are currently being carried by these promoters as well as our own, and trying to tone the rhetoric down, especially as it pertains to race and religion and sex. I think it's inappropriate. I've had enough of it and I really don't want to hear it anymore. So I'd like to, and we're going to have to involve the fight community and everybody on that, but it's time to temper that. So when we need to adjust with the times, and that's what we do. Are there any other comments from the other commissioners?
I have one for a future agenda. We'll reach out. Can we expect to have Dylan Dennis on our agenda for February?
Mike Denver from the Attorney General's office, for the record, it is anticipated that we can go forward on the February commission date. That is the intention.
Okay. It'd be great to resolve all matters from October 2018 to move forward.
Okay, I look for a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes unanimously. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
I'll take it now. All right. I'm gonna have it. Get used to it. Get used to the old needles. I want to test it. Should I still thank you to the side or not? Is that not? Just what now? Should we have a little problem in the back room?
Congrats, John.
John, comment on my 2
Hey, Don, how are you? Good to see you.